Our scripture is from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3, do you think, was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." May God add a blessing to the reading and the hearing of the gospel.
This feels to me like a really good Sunday to talk about what it means to be a neighbor. Of course, we've heard from Mr. Rogers about wanting to be a neighbor, but what does it actually mean to be a neighbor? Here we are being able to worship with our neighbors. We've not done something like this before as a congregation, and I don't know if you all have, but I think maybe not. This is new for both of us. What an opportunity it is to be able to worship with one's neighbor. And then I and 15 others have just returned from a neighboring country, Guatemala, where we learned firsthand what it means to be a neighbor. It's almost a week now since most of us have come back. I think we still have one person there, Debbie's husband, Jesus. But most of us are back from Guatemala and our work there with Common Hope. The images, the smells, the memory in my muscles still linger. It's not even a week, but I can still feel in my arms the last hammer I held. We were a large group, 16 of us. There were youth among us, young adults, and some older adults smashed in there somewhere. We bunked together, now that's a trip, and shared all of our meals together, which means we shared some snoring, some coughs, some really good toast and jam and jelly, really great Guatemalan coffee, and everything else you can imagine. We worked in a variety of teams with each other during the day. So during the day, we got some breaks. We were, however, rarely apart, and we functioned in every instance like a big family flowing through the days and nights together. We managed, all of us, in one very short week to go on several visits with Common Hope social workers, I think some of the best in the world, to outskirting villages and individual homes where we sat in homes with social workers and talked with mothers and parents and young people about their lives. We even got to teach in schools. We visited 3 schools in the course of our week, and we taught art. We made turtles and sang songs and music and shared putting together art projects with about 100 first and second graders. Now, many of us don't speak Spanish, and we found that the universal language is speaking with your hands, making art, and singing. Some of us, our youth and young adults, played soccer with 150 Guatemalan youth. They almost beat them. No, that's not what happened. And others of us learned, going up high into the mountains, how to make tortillas from scratch, coming in with corn and ending with a tortilla. Perhaps most profound and most understated was that our entire team built in the course of 1 week a small house for a Guatemalan family. Some of us even made cement, mixing the dirt and the stones and the cement from the beginning, and poured it into large tiles. And some others of us collectively hammered and nailed 38 huge wood panels together to create a 2-room house for a single mother and her children. When we dedicated the house to that family, we sang at the end of the dedication, "Santo, Santo, Santo." And that small Guatemalan family was amazed at the music we made together, and also our being able to share in their language. And perhaps the biggest thrill of the week, at least for me, was that I got to ride in one of those great Guatemalan chicken buses. Have you ever seen one? They're amazing. They're decorated up in all sorts of colors and different names on the doors and the windows, and you get to ride in this bus where I think they call it a chicken bus because chickens ride in the bus too. I was not in a bus with a real chicken, but I did happen to notice when my bus departed and went away, the name of my bus, Jesus Christ, on the front and the back as a blessing, a thrill of a lifetime. The biggest gift of the week for me was being able to experience firsthand this amazing organization called Common Hope. This is a result of a vacationing Minnesota family years ago who came to this country for a good time and left seeing a deep need in that country and with the country's children, left with a dream and a desire to help Guatemalan families. They saw, as they looked at the children, that it was difficult for some families to get their children to school and to obtain a good education for their children. And so they decided to start Common Hope, which in its essence is an organization that places its emphasis and its strength in helping gain education for children. But in the process of that, you have to make sure that kids get necessities of life, things like health care, good nutrition, and strong and firm housing. 27 years later, they've been at it for 27 years, Common Hope hosts groups like us from around the world. We come to spend our time volunteering to help a great organization which has a committed focus on helping educate children of poor families in one of Central America's most vulnerable countries. The second big gift of the week was the opportunity that we had as part of our congregation and community to be the church in Guatemala. We were so aware of your prayers, your thoughts, and your support, all the support that you gave to us as we moved our way into this experience and while we were there. It is these kinds of experiences, I believe, that keep on giving in a congregation. The journey isn't complete when we return home, but it continues. We will nourish it over the months and years ahead as we continue to discover in deep ways what it means to live and give in the midst of community. And as we grow in our understanding and our grasp of the critical issues confronting our world. The demand is placed upon us to address global poverty, violence, sustainability, and economic justice. Those issues were an inescapable part of our day. Every morning when we woke up and went out into the city and out into Guatemala, it was something we knew we were confronting and had to deal with. At the same time, just as palpable, just as present, was the warmth, the acceptance, and the desire of each human being we met to be loved, to be known, and to be accepted. After the decades and decades of brutal violence and repression in this tiny country, it is struggling to emerge again. If there is a universal language, if there is a universal language among us, a language of hope and peace, a language that is spoken by all of us, no matter what language we speak, Guatemalans speak that language with strength, hope, and assurance. Now we know that church groups have been taking trips like this for decades now. Who has gone on a church trip, a work camp, or a church trip experience? That's amazing. And whose life was changed because you went on that trip, right? I mean, it is a significant moment. In its more benevolent form, we learn, I think, through these trips how to be more caring and compassionate. When we take time out of our lives to immerse ourselves in another culture and learn about it from an intimate vantage point. On some level, it is trips like this that help us to learn what it means to be a good Samaritan, which is the basic lesson, I think, of the spiritual life. How to be compassionate and caring with your neighbor. After all, Jesus told the story to the rich young ruler, and after they had a conversation, the rich young ruler came up with this question, and then the answer is the Good Samaritan. And I can see the rich young ruler not going, "Who's my neighbor?" But I can see the rich young ruler saying, "Just who is my neighbor?" I think he was defensive. It's easy to answer that the neighbor is someone who is poor or needy and needs our help. But we diminish ourselves when we do this, and those we serve when we imply that compassion is a one-way street. In the Hebrew Testament, neighbor means near dweller, but refers more generally to people who are not members of one's tribe or family. So a neighbor is not a member of one's tribe or family. In the Old Testament, loving your neighbor implied an expanding vision of community, moving beyond intimates, beyond those we know, into new territory, learning to love the alien as yourself. God reminded the Israelites that they were once strangers in a strange land. They were once aliens themselves. God reminded them now, as a majority in Israel, that they were once a minority people. And so God charged Israel with a memory of what it is like to be an alien, an outsider, and invited that memory to inform Israel's treatment of those beyond tribe. Jesus did the same thing, but he took it one step further. Jesus reminded us not only to reach out toward the alien, but to love our enemies. Jesus' vision of the compassionate community goes beyond those we find easy to love into that hard place of radical inclusion. It is this story of the poor guy left for dying at the side of the road that Jesus tells us about becoming a neighbor. Now we know that the priest and the Levite chose not to become a neighbor, but the Samaritan, the one who was an outsider, the one who was an alien, the one who was not to be trusted, shows us the quality of the good neighbor. The lawyer's a lot like us. The lawyer says, "I want a prescription. Just tell me who's in my circle. I know that I need to love God. Yes, I do that. And I know I need to love some people. But how low or how far out do I need to go?" and is the expected answer that Jesus might have given that we're pretty comfortable with. Reach out to your family and friends, reach out to your community at work, reach out to your community of faith or like-minded folks, and don't forget to give some of your money away. Obey the laws, and don't speed down any highways. Then you're set to go. But Jesus reminds us that being a neighbor means leaving everything that is comfortable in our circle and extending ourselves out beyond into what is a discomfort zone. Now, there are loads of ways to do this. You don't have to take a trip to Guatemala or volunteer to serve the homeless breakfast. It might mean something as small in your life as taking a moment to remember the last time you were beaten up a bit or laying face down in a ditch, and who picked you up and got you out. It might mean something as small as remembering the last time you needed a neighbor and one showed up before you could let out a whimper. I believe there were two kinds of folks listening to Jesus' story on that day. Those who, like the lawyer, needed to be reminded about compassion and caring, and those who were willing to admit that they needed to be lifted up and cared for. Remember that there are always those two folks around Jesus, those who were trying to hold up the law and those who needed healing, those who were hungry, those who were desperate, those who were lonely and lost. They heard this story too. They got to hear along with the lawyer. I wonder where they saw themselves in the story. Perhaps what it means to be a good neighbor is simply to realize that every act of caring and giving that arises up and out of us is not because we are better or more able to give, but because we know what it means to be hurt or alone or beaten up and sometimes left for almost dead. Perhaps the priest and the Levite just had not done their compassion work. They could look at a tragedy, at a tough experience from afar, and they had no need to be involved. They could skim the surface of life. For me, they were not deeply alive, staying safe by separating themselves from the pain and the joy and the payoff of simply being present to another person. This summer, the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard celebrates what would be his 200th birthday. It's being celebrated all over the world. Kierkegaard's book, Works of Love, takes on the discussion of the neighbor in our culture. Kierkegaard discusses the neighbor as simply being the human being. He describes being a human being as the fundamental qualification for being alive. If we try to compare ourselves to another by either going up or down in the world, we've missed something powerful and important about being alive. Comparing ourselves to another person is a selfish moment. In comparing ourselves, there's always a one up and a one down. Love then is made finite and limited, the opposite of what God intends. Being preoccupied with differences diminishes our humanness, Kierkegaard says, and our humanity. Love flows in a human being from the center and the heart. Rather than separating ourselves from each other, let love flow. I believe that what made the Good Samaritan a wonderful neighbor is that intangible quality of being a human being. Being a human being who recognized the need for care that each person and that he himself desires. who understands loneliness and loss, and who is able to reach forth without fear, no matter the instance, to comfort and to care, to soothe and to love. I heard an amazing quote this week by John Lewis, our United States Congressman and our civil rights hero. He puts it this way: "Our lives are not our own. They belong to those who need us desperately." Our lives are not our own. They belong to those who need us desperately. Amen.